Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. I'm sure there'll be stragglers coming. Let me get this a little further away. So just want to thank everybody for coming out on a Tuesday evening to talk finance, which isn't the most exciting topic. So tonight I'm going to talk, do a presentation. I'll kind of stop in the middle for some questions, but probably about 45, 50 minutes or so. We're going to talk about finance, obviously, how the city organizes its finances, the pressures that we're under due to various state laws and how they affect our bottom line. Talk about why council tasked a financial review committee, what the financial review committee recommended, and then how council is moving forward with those recommendations. So the first thing, if we go to the next slide, please, Mike. Well, that's the overall agenda. Yeah, the first thing I want to do is introduce the committee members. We've got Timothy Hillman sitting over here, Regina Jones over there, Salim Siddiqui is going to join us. He looks like he's running a little bit late, and then Deborah McDonald, who can't make it tonight. And then, in addition, we had some advisors to the committee. We had Michelle Townsend and Mike Green, our city treasurer, and our city administrator, and then we also had some consultants who worked with the committee. So I want to start out with a question, and if you've seen this presentation, you know, that's somewhat similar to the one we did 6 months ago, don't shout out an answer, but I want to start out with a question. So back in 2008, just before the market crash, the real estate market crash, the city had an aggregate taxable value. And what I mean by that is the aggregate value of all the properties in the city. And that aggregate value was $191.3 million. It was the all-time high that Lathrup Village had reached. Then we had the crash, and then obviously we recovered from the crash, and we've blown way past where we were back in 2008. So now that we're 17 years past the crash, what do you think the aggregate taxable value of the city is today?
$250 million.
250 million. Do I have another number? Any other guesses? 168, okay. Any other guesses? $1 billion? Frank, we only wish. We only wish. All right, so come on up, Salim, we just started. So this is Salim, everybody, another member of the committee. All right, well, I'm going to table that for now, and we'll come back to that after we get into some of the topics that we're going to discuss. So, and the other thing is, there are note cards on the sides and in the back. If you have questions, feel free to write out a note card, give it up to Mike, and don't be shy. If I'm in the middle of talking, something piques your interest, make a note card, give it to Mike, and I'm going to stop halfway and address some of the questions, and then we'll talk more at the end of the session as well. Okay. So the first thing I want to do is just talk about our city finances. So for a variety of reasons, all of which we're going to discuss in a little bit. The city is having increasing difficulty coming up with the revenue that we need to provide our residents with the services that they want and that they expect. And there are a lot of examples. I could spend half the night talking about them, but just here's a few. A recreation director. The city hasn't had a recreation director for 2 years, maybe 3 years now, because we simply can't afford the $60,000, $70,000 plus benefits to pay and salary to that person. Probably the biggest example I can think of is our roads. You know, most cities fund their roads through their general fund, their property taxes. We haven't been able to do that for decades. We've underfunded our roads. We haven't funded our roads. And what happened? Our roads crumbled, and we had to go out to the residents and ask for a special millage in order to pay for our roads. Other examples, the elevator in this building should have been replaced 10 years ago. The HVAC in this building, we spend $5,000, $10,000 a year patching it instead of replacing it, which is what we need to do. So we just keep wasting money to keep it because we don't have the money to replace it. Our vehicles, you know, we've got a backhoe that's 5-10 years out past its useful life, but we're still using it and dealing with it because we don't have the money to buy a new one. Our Town magazine, you know, we used to produce that a couple times a year. Costs us $10,000. We don't have the money to spend on that. Another glaring example that I thought of today is back when we were repaving Southfield Road this summer, there was a lot of cut-through traffic, and people kept saying, well, we got to do something about it. Well, that requires bringing another officer in. That costs money. Again, we don't have that in the budget. so those are some of the things, that we're dealing with. But then we have other pressures that we're starting to feel now and toward, and in the near future. So one of the things, our police contract was just renegotiated. That costs us, I think, $43,000 more than it did last year. And that's the minimum. It's probably going to be somewhere around the neighborhood of around $60,000. Our pension. So employees that were here before 2013 were eligible for a pension. So about a decade ago, we put $1 million in the pension fund, and it was fully funded. Well, the General Accounting Standards Board changed their methodology, and so now we're only considered 76% funded. So they want us to put another $350,000 in that fund. We can't put $20,000 in, let alone $350,000 that they're saying we need. And then one last example, and this is a big one, Michigan First, our biggest taxpayer in the city. They contested their property tax valuation, and they won. They lowered the property tax valuation, or the taxable value, by $5.6 million, which equates to a loss of $145,000 in revenue for the city. So you add that all up, that's about $600,000 right there that we have to somehow come up with next year. So it's putting a lot of strain on our future budgets. Through some great work of Michelle and Mike, we did some belt tightening again this year, and we were able to come up with a balanced budget. But again, our next fiscal year 26 budget is going to be a lot more difficult. And last year, I spent some time, about 3 months, doing an analysis of all of our line items in the budget. So all of the expenses, all of the revenue line items, looking for ways that we could save money and grow our general fund, and came up with a lot of suggestions. And actually, Mike and Michelle already had some of those. We're already working on some of those when I gave them to them, but they implemented a lot of those. But that's not going to save the kind of money that we need to grow our general fund and continue to be able to provide the services that residents want. And so because of that, Council tasked the Financial Review Committee. And our goal as a committee was to figure out how we could provide a sustained and significant increase in revenue and grow our general fund. So that was the goal of the committee. And what I'll do is more towards the end of the presentation, I'll come back and talk about what we came up with in terms of recommendations and how we're moving forward with those recommendations. But before I get into that, what I want to do is talk a little bit about municipal finance and kind of lay a base. Municipal finance is very, very different from corporate finance. We have a whole set of rules and regulations and laws that we have to follow. And I think for some of the decisions that residents are going to have to make in the near future, it's really a good thing to understand the ins and outs of finance so that you can make an informed decision. So the first thing I want to do is talk about the way that we organize our money as a city. So we organize it into funds, and there are a variety of different funds that we have, but the major four are the Water and Sewer Fund, the Major Road Fund, the Local Road Fund, and the General Fund. And I want to talk about each of those real briefly. So the Water and Sewer Fund is what we call an enterprise fund. You can almost think of it as a separate business that the city runs. So that's completely funded through the water bills, that water and sewer bills that all our residents and businesses pay. It's a complete and separate entity. And in fact, there were some conspiracy theories going around a year or so ago about how the city was using water and sewer funds to prop up the general fund. That's illegal. And we would have been dinged for that pretty severely in our audit. So the Water and Sewer Fund, you can think of it as a separate business. So we're not here to talk about the Water and Sewer Fund today. The road funds, those are primarily funded through what's called Act 51 money from the state. So they give us some money, and that money is just enough for us to do the day-to-day maintenance on the road. Doesn't amount to enough for us to be doing any type of repaving. And then lastly, you have the general fund, and that's really what we're going to talk most about tonight. And the general fund is really all of our operational expenditures. So things like the police, the fire department, the DPW, the library, employee salaries, office equipment, recreation, things like that. So all of our operational revenue comes in, most all of our operational revenue comes into the general fund, and most of our expenses come out of the general fund. So you can almost think of it as the city's checkbook. And like your checkbook at home, you want that balance to be as high as possible so that you can pay for the things that you need to pay for to live. So there are a variety of sources of revenue that go into the general fund, but the biggest chunk of revenue is from property taxes. So basically, we're all property owners here, and so basically what happens is your property has a taxable value associated with it assigned by the county. We take that taxable value and we multiply it times the chartered millage rate of the city, which is 20 mils. So way back when, the city, actually I don't even know that it was way back when, but we voted in a charter as a city, and we said as residents that we need 20 mils in order to operate the city and do all the things that we need to do. So you multiply those two numbers together, and that's what you pay in taxes to the city. Now, while the chartered rate is 20 mils, what we actually pay is about 17.3 mils. So we're paying significantly less than what we're supposed to be paying according to the charter. And why that is, I'll talk about in a few minutes. So traditionally, from year to year, the city has been able to grow the general fund. So when all expenses and revenue were done at the end of the year, we would grow the general fund. It would get a little bit bigger. The balance in the fund would get bigger. But the last several years, it's become more increasingly difficult. The fund has gone from 1.6 million, then the next year it dropped to 1.2 million, then it dropped to 583,000, and then this last year it actually rose a little bit to 745,000, but that was pretty much due to a one-time revenue hit. So we did the sidewalk improvement program. The city fronted the cost for that, and residents paid us back, and so that's where that increase pretty much came from. So without that one-time hit, we probably would have been stagnant or maybe even dropped a little bit more. So municipal best practice suggests that the balance of your general fund is about 20% of the overall expenditures for the year. We're at about 14%. So we're lower than where we need to be. And so what we need to do is figure out a way to grow that. So that really begs a couple of questions. So the first question is, why is it that we don't have the revenue or the balance in the general fund that we had 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago? And so we'll talk about some reasons for that in a minute. And then the other question that I hear a lot, in fact, they were talking about it at the town hall that they had last week, is we pay really, really high property taxes relative to every other city in the state. So why is it that we don't have enough money to run the city? So we'll talk about that as well. Okay. So in terms of why we're having issues with revenue, there are really 5 factors that go into that. The first one is the market crash that we had in 2008. Then you have a couple of state laws, which is Proposition A, and then the Headley Amendment. And then you have things like reduction in state shared revenue and inflation. So I'm going to talk about each of these, and then we'll kind of pause for some questions. So the first one was Proposition A. And Proposition A, I think a lot of you probably know what Proposition A is. It was basically a tax law that went into effect in 1994, and the idea behind it was it would control the amount of taxes that individual homeowners pay so that people didn't get taxed out of their homes as the market value of their homes increased dramatically. Now I have to lower my voice because the fan went off. And so basically what Prop A says is it limits the growth in your taxable value in a given year to the lesser of inflation or 5%. So what does that mean? So let's say this year we have 3% inflation. Then what's going to happen is when you get your tax statement next March, your taxable value will go up 3%. Now, if it was a few years ago where we saw 8% inflation, then what's going to happen is your taxable value will only go up 5% because it's capped because of Prop A. Okay, so what we've had is years and years, decades of big market increases in the values of our homes, while Prop A limited the taxable value increase to very small increments. So while your market value goes up like this, your taxable value only goes up like that. And so what you have are situations, and I know a lot of people in the room, a lot of people who have been here 20, 25, 30 years, you have a situation where you have a homeowner who's been in their home, say, for 35 years. They can go out and sell their home for, say, $420,000, but their taxable value is only $70,000 because year after year, their taxable value only grew in small increments. So it did what it was supposed to do. It controlled taxes for individual property owners. But unfortunately, what the legislature never considered when they passed this act was that property values could go down, because they never had. But then came 2008, and we had the market crash. And in 2008, almost overnight, most of us lost 40, 45, 50% of the value of our homes. Our taxable values plummeted. So the city lost $75 million almost overnight in taxable value. So what does that translate to? We're getting 45, 50% less revenue than we were getting before the crash. So when I talk about this, a lot of people say, well, okay, well, that was 17 years ago. Why do we care about that now? The market has recovered, and we all know it's blown way past where it was in 2008. Well, the reason is, think about what I just told you about Proposition A. Okay, Proposition A only allows small increments in your taxable value. So your taxable value plummeted, it dropped in half, but now it can only rise up ever so slightly. So while the market value continued to go up, your taxable value went up in a much smaller way. So I always throw out the question when I talk about this is imagine you go into work tomorrow and your boss says to you, all right, well, you know what, we're going to have to cut your salary by 45%. And I know you have a really specialized job, so there's nowhere else you can work, and you're 17 years away from retirement, so you're stuck. Okay, well, what's going to happen? Your discretionary expenses are going to go away, right? You're not going to take that vacation. You're not going to buy the toys for your kids. If your air conditioning is on its last legs and you need $8,000 to replace it, you're going to spend $500 to patch it instead. Same thing, if your roof, you're not going to spend $30,000 on a roof. You'll patch the hole. Well, that's the same thing that the city underwent, right? So for the last 17 years, we've been deferring expenses year after year because we can't afford them. We can't afford to replace the HVAC system in this room. You all saw how loud it was a minute ago. We couldn't afford to adequately fund our roads. Our DPW building needs to be raised and rebuilt. It's falling apart, but we don't have the money to do that. So all of these things get deferred and deferred and deferred, and eventually you get to a point like we have in the last few years where there are just things we cannot live without. We can't have a truck that doesn't have a floorboard, so that when the DPW drives, they get splashed by the snow and ice. And in fact, our capital improvement program, capital improvement plan has identified $20 million in needed spend. And a lot of that, probably at least half of that, is deferred types of expenses. So that's really those are really the first two factors that are really choking us as a city. It's the Prop A and the market crash. So the second kind of dagger, or third dagger, is what's known as the Headley Amendment. So Headley went into effect in 1978, and it was very similar to Prop A in that Prop A was designed to control how much a homeowner could be taxed. Headley was designed to control how much a city can take in taxable income, or take in income from their residents. And so what Headley says is that in any year where the aggregate taxable value of the city goes up from one year to the next, the city's required to drop the millage rate so it gets no more income than it got in the prior year with the small adjustment for inflation. So Mike, you're already ahead of me. So in this example here, this isn't the city, but it's just an example for illustrative purposes. So if this were Lathrup in year one, the taxable value is $100 million. So if the millage rate for the city was 10 mils, you'd multiply 100 million times 0.010, or 10 mils, and you'd come up with a revenue amount of $1 million. So that's what the city would have to work with for that year. Now you go to the next year, and see, we need a new projector too. You go to the next year, and it rises to $110 million in taxable value. So now, because the taxable value went up, the city is required to lower its millage rate, in this case down to about 9 mils, so it gets that same $1 million. And so what happens is, in any year when the aggregate value goes up, the millage rate goes down. Okay? And unfortunately, in those years, which is very seldom, I think it's only been 1 or 2 years since Headley's been in effect, where the taxable value decreases, you don't get to put the millage rate back up. So our millage rate is going to continue to fall pretty much every year unless we do one of two things. And the only way to stop it is doing one of these two things. One of them is to do a Headley override. And so back in 2010, as market values, had gone up over years and years and years, and the millage rate had fallen, our millage rate had gone all the way down to 16 mils. So we're supposed to be getting 20, we were only getting 16. So we lost 20% of our revenue just due to Headley. Okay, and so the voters did what was called a Headley override. They put a question on the ballot, and basically was whether or not to do a Headley override, which basically means that the residents are giving the city the permission to take that millage rate from 16 and put it back at 20. And so we did that. We put it back at 20, and from 2008 to 2014, there were some modest increases in taxable value, so we stayed roughly around 20 mils, but then starting in 2014, as we all know, the market took off again. And as it took off, the millage rate had to keep dropping. And so now we're all the way back down to 17.3. So when I talked at the very beginning how we take your property value and we multiply it times 17.3, that's why we're multiplying times 17.3 instead of 20. So again, we've lost a fair amount of our income. So that's one way. The only other way to counter the effects of Headley is to build new properties outside of the business district. But as we all know, our residential area is pretty much built out. So there's not really a lot of room to build new properties. So what that means is that our revenue is going to stay flat in perpetuity. And the reason, I was very specific in saying outside of the business district, because new properties inside the business district don't help the city out in terms of its general fund. Because what happens, so for example, where are we? Michigan First, did that major expansion, 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago. I don't remember exactly when it was. And their taxable value skyrocketed. But that property is in the DDA, the Downtown Development District, essentially. And so what happens is any incremental increase in value, the taxes associated with that go to the DDA, not to the city. Separate legal entities, separate finances, and so forth. Now, the one good thing is we have a really good relationship with our DDA. So they help us out in terms of expenses. We have a cost-sharing agreement. So they pay some of Mike's salary, some of Michelle's salary. They pay for half the code enforcer. They pay for beautification efforts around the city. So a lot of things they pay for, and they help the city out. But again, this whole concept of Headley, it just meant more deferrals, because every year we're getting less and less income relative to inflation and everything else, so we have to defer more expenses. So that's Headley. Next slide, please. The other area is state shared revenue. So as taxpayers, as a city and as individuals, we send a lot of money up to Lansing every year. And by law, by statute, and by the state constitution, the state is required to give a percentage of that money back to all the municipalities within the state. And starting in about 2001, what the state started doing is balancing its own budget by not giving the full amount back to the individual cities. And there's been a lot of lawsuits about that. Most of them have gone nowhere. But the long and the short of it is the Michigan Municipal League has calculated that from 2002 to 2020, the city lost $2 million in revenue that we were required to get, but we didn't. And so you can see here on the graph, starting in 2001, we were getting about $525,000. You can see it steadily declined, went down to about roughly $300,000. It's going back up. It has been over the last several years, but even as recently as 2023, which is as far as this graph goes out, we're still getting less state shared revenue than we received back in 2000. So again, it's just another third dagger. It's more money that we should have got that we didn't. So that's $2 million that could have been spent on a recreation coordinator, on roads, on a new HVAC system, on new vehicles, and so on. So all of these factors really shrink our revenue and make it more difficult for us to meet our expenses. So there are a few other factors. One that I do want to talk about. I get asked a lot about what's known as uncapping. So when a house is sold in Lathrup, and we know Lathrup what's the word I'm looking for, people want to live here. And so when houses go up for sale, they typically get sold relatively quickly. And when those houses are sold, they get what's called uncapped. And basically what that means is the taxable value, the protections of Prop A that we talked about, get reset. So for example, that $420,000 house that I used as an example a little bit earlier, if that person sells their house, remember they had a taxable value of $70,000, when they sell that house, the taxable value gets reset. And typically what it is, it's roughly about half the market value is what it gets reset to. So in this case, that home would then have a new taxable value of $210,000. Okay, so that's 3 times more than the old owner. So that new owner is going to pay taxes based on $210,000 instead of $70,000. So a $70,000 home is roughly around $4,000 in taxes. So that new owner is going to spend $12,000 in taxes. And so you think about that, I don't know how many homes we sell per year, but you think, okay, well, that's a good income stream and it's going to increase our revenue. So at least we've got that, right? Well, wrong. Because if you remember what we talked about a little bit earlier with respect to Headley, that home sale contributes. So it was at $70,000 of taxable value. It's now at $210,000. So that puts a $140,000 increase in our taxable value. And what happens when our taxable value increases? Our millage rate drops. Okay, so it's not going to drop much from that one house, but what's going to end up happening is you're going to pay $30 less that year, you're going to pay $20 less, you're going to pay $15, I'm going to pay $30 less. And what ends up happening is that $8,000 increase that one taxpayer is suffering through is totally negated by all the aggregate rest of the city. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. So uncapping doesn't help us. And it's something that the Dems had all 3 branches of government, and they had talked about, looking to correct that, because that was, again, something they didn't foresee, but it didn't happen in the last session. So two more real quick. Inflation is another factor. We know we've seen dramatic increases in inflation over the last several years, 8 or 7%, 6.5%, 3.4%. So again, that significantly diminishes the city's buying power. Everything that we pay for gets more expensive. And one area where that's been big has been staff. I mean, because of COVID, the job force market is tight, salaries have gone up, so they've been inflated, and we've had a lot of turnover in the last several years, so every time we hire a new staff, we end up paying more. So again, it's more money out the door. And then lastly, especially given a lot of us here are residents who've been here for a long time, we've got a lot of expenses now that we never had when we moved in here, 10, 15 years ago, 30 years ago, whatever. So for example, last August, we approved roughly, I think it was $45,000, $50,000, something like that, for new tasers for the police force. 10 years ago, we never had tasers for the police force. That's $50,000 that we had to come up with. And those tasers are only good for 4 years. So we're going to have, in 4 years, we're going to have to spend probably $60,000 for new tasers. Camera data vests, those aren't cheap. The data archiving that goes along with those vests and the data archiving that we have to do for everything that happens in this building. Data servers, data security, building security, internet hosting, since COVID, sanitation expenses, mandated training. There's all sorts of mandated training that our staff, and especially our police officers, have to go through that all costs money. And then the other one that people don't think about is software. We've got all sorts of software licenses at $5,000, $10,000 a pop that we never had 10, 15 years ago. So all of these things add up. So when you look at the entire picture, it's pretty bleak, right? I mean, you've got all 5 of the factors. I'm not going to name them again. We've talked about them. But they're all kind of strangling the city in terms of revenue. So as prices are going up and as we've deferred all these expenses, we have less and less revenue to be able to cover them. Okay, so now circling back to the question that I asked a little bit earlier, we had 2 answers. One was kind of what you would expect, and the other one was pretty much dead on. I asked in 2008 our third choice is the charm. Our taxable value was $191 million. It was at an all-time high. And then it crashed, and then the market recovered and blew way back past where we were back then. And I asked, what was the aggregate taxable value now, or actually last year? What'd you say, Alan, 160? Yeah. 168? A little higher, 176, you were close. 176 million. So we're still $15 million less in value than we were 17 years ago. So in terms of dollars, what does that mean? So at 20 mills, the 191 million from 2008 generated $3.8 million in revenue for the city. The 176 is only 3.5 million. So we're actually $306,000 less in revenue now than we were 17 years ago. So kind of let that sink in. Think about if that was your own checkbook, what would happen? Okay. So let me pause here. Did anybody have a question cards or any for Mike? Questions on specifically, we'll take questions, other types of questions later, but questions specifically on the content that we just covered, or if you want to shout them out if. Oh, come on, I couldn't have done that good of a job of explaining it. Okay, Roger. Yep.
You know, on that slide that you have, you know, the taxable value versus the millage, you know, going back. Yeah, that one. You know, you say when the millage rate drops, the homeowners are still paying the same, homeowners are still paying the same millage. I'm still paying the same millage. But where does the difference go?
What do you mean?
Well, right here, you know, that example right here where you're showing, okay, the taxable value is 100 million for year one. Then year two, it's 110 million.
Right, so you see what happened. So because it was 110 million and it went up,
Right.
we had to lower the millage rate.
But
Right.
the homeowners are still paying the higher millage rate, aren't we?
No, your millage rate drops. So you should be paying 20 mils, but you're not. You're paying 17.3 because Headley lowers it. And that's the problem. I mean, we're getting less revenue. I mean, we as a city said we need 20 mils to operate, and we're getting, you know, well, now we're getting 17.3. In 2010, we were getting 16. You know, which is why, you know, they put it on the ballot to do a Headley override. Does that make sense, Roger?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. Okay. Mike, did you want to say anything about the budget this year or next year before I get into a little bit more content here?
Yeah, Michelle and I can talk on it a little bit. As Bruce mentioned, we did have a balanced budget this year, which is fantastic. Through 7 months of the year, our expenses are at 55%, so we're just under our target, which is normally 58% for this time. So staff-wise, we are feeling very confident right now. Revenues are coming in higher than projected, so overall this year we're feeling confident, and we have been able to check off some capital items. We've been able to get our DPW new truck that they desperately needed. They got a new heating system for their building that was clearly outdated. We've been able to address some things with the police, like getting their new contract done. But even though these things are good, as Bruce was talking about, these pressures have added up over the years, and next year it's going to be a challenging budget. So like we talked about, new police contract, next year it's going to at least go up 40 grand. Our fire contract with Southfield is up this year, so we'll start negotiating with them. Realistically, that's another probably 5% increase, so that's probably another $36,000 we're looking from them. As Bruce talked about, recreation, we know this town loves recreation. We know our facilities are old. Realistically, we need new playgrounds at every single stop in the city. Playgrounds nowadays are roughly $400,000 minimum, because if we're going to qualify for any grants, they got to be ADA compliant. Even if we get a grant, we'll need a 20% match, so there's another 80 grand just gone. DPS needs new backhoe, $100,000, just that general operation. Building roof, even though they need a new building, just, we know that's not realistic. Realistically, that'd be $1.7 to $2 million for them to get a new building. To get them by, they need a new roof just to make that building essentially habitable, 130 grand at least. Leaf machine, I know this city loves having leaves picked up in the fall. We have one truly operational leaf machine. They have two out there, one limps by. They're about $75,000 a piece. City Hall, you guys just look in this room. I know you'll see the watermarks on the ceiling. This is $20,000, $30,000 just for the ceiling and the roof to get replaced. This building is also over 50 years old. Bruce has mentioned the HVAC a lot. There's a lot of other things that you guys don't see on a daily basis that staff sees that needs to get addressed. For example, one thing, you guys are sitting in chairs that are over 10 years old. I think we can all agree they should probably be replaced. That'll probably be another 15 grand. And then police, we got their contract. They definitely need another vehicle or two. Those are going to run $70,000+ each. So while we feel confident on the operations side where we can manage it, it's all these capital items that have just been deferred for years that we really need to start addressing, or we're not going to be able to function as a city.
Yeah, one other one I can throw in there. How many of you guys have had ditch flooding issues either now or in the past? Only one? Okay, there's some people. Yeah. Just overflowing, not flowing, whatever. I mean, another great example is, 15 years ago, we had a jetter. And the jetter is used, I mean, the ditches are technically the homeowner responsibility, but we had a jetter and we could come out and clear your culvert so that the water would continue to flow. Every time we run into that situation, we have to borrow or pay Southfield to use theirs because ours has been beyond repair and those things are over $100,000. I mean, again, it's just services that we can't provide because, we don't have the money. So, I didn't talk about this slide. I'll just mention real quickly. This shows how much money the individual states are giving back to their cities. Look at Michigan. Michigan's one of 4 that's giving less money over time. And look how far down that is. We're very different in terms of how the state government treats its municipalities. I forgot about that one, but okay. So it's the same. I mean, you don't have the data. It's still relevant today. Okay, so let me go on to the second question. So again, we hear over and over again that we have such high taxes, which we do. I mean, we're all, well, not all, not the two of you, but all of us and all of you, we're all taxpayers. We all get hit the same way. And what you can see is that the total tax burden that we have as residents is about 56.4 mils roughly. And what's important to understand is that when you send that check up to the city doesn't keep most of that money. And so you can see how our millage rates break out. I should have brought my laser pointer, but how it breaks out by individual line items. So if you look at the first item there, it's general operating. That's the 20 mils that's in our charter. And right now, Headley has lowered that down to 17.3 mils. If you look at refuse, a lot of people don't know we have a separate refuse millage. And by refuse, I mean trash, recycling, leaf pickup. And that's 3 mils. And Headley has rolled that down to 2.5 mils. So this is another great example of where we're hurting because, okay, our contract is coming up for renewal for our trash services. So we're going to see 5% or more of an increase, but we're getting less money to pay for it. So where does that delta come out of? Comes out of the general fund. So again, just another example. County operating, you can see that's been Headley lowered to about 3.9 mils. And then you have 5 different local county millages. So those add up to roughly about 2 mils. So that's like the zoo and the Detroit Institute of Arts and the Metro Parks and so forth. Then you have the road millage. And you'll notice the road millage isn't Headley'd because millages that are designed around debt, Headley can't touch, which is a good thing because that ensures that we continually have the appropriate amount of money to pay off the road bond from the 3-year road project that we finished last year. And then all sorts of millages for the school, roughly about 25 mils worth of assessments for OCC, special ed, state ed, and so forth. And so you can see a lot of the millages that are assessed to you every year the money doesn't come to the actual city. And it's really a lot easier to see if you look at it graphically. And so what you can see here is that you've got the schools at 45% and the college at 2%. So right off the bat, almost 50% of the check that you send to the city goes to support various schools. 7% to the county, 3% to the region. You can see 7% for the streets, refuse 5%. And I did put the library in the graph here because we do have a dedicated contract with the library, which costs us 1 mil. So really that leaves 29% of your check for general operating purposes of the city. So over 2/3, roughly about 70% of what you send to the city goes somewhere else, leaving us with just the 30% of your check. And so if you go to the next slide, So here we've got this 30%. What does the city do with that 30%? Well, what you can see right off the bat, almost 60% now of that 30% that we keep goes for police and fire. 6% goes for public service, which is the DPW. 14% for government services, so that's things like planning, engineering, city communications, audits, cable TV, building department, things like that. 19% to the administration. Again, this is 19% of the 30% that we hang on to. Administration is salary and benefits for the staff. And then building and grounds is 3%, so that's the community room, city hall, the DPW facility, the parks, and so forth. And then a whopping 0% for recreation. Okay? And then the other way that really makes this hit a little bit closer to home is to turn it in terms of dollars. So again, you know, that $420,000 homeowner with a taxable value of $70,000, they're going to have a tax bill of roughly around $4,000. So you can see right off the bat, about $2,000 of that goes to cover, you know, school expenses, $280 for the county, $270 for the street, and really what's left is roughly about $1,200 that goes to the city. And then if you go to the next slide, you can see of that $1,200, $722 goes to the police and fire department. Police and fire is really expensive. And that leaves, less than $500 for all of the other things that the city needs to do. And so, again, proportionally, it's not a lot. So you think about $500 for general operating out of a $4,000 check. Okay. So yes, I mean, there's no question, you know, we all pay our taxes, but again, a lot of it doesn't stay with the city. So that's kind of the underlying finance, the issues that caused council to task a financial review committee. And so we were formed, so it was the four of us plus Deborah McDonald who couldn't make it today, to find a way to provide the city with sustained growth in the general fund, and the key word there being sustained. And so the committee started out by analyzing all of the expenses and all of the revenue associated with the city. We looked at various reports, budgets. Mike and Michelle, you know, spoke to us. We had a consultant come in, and we very quickly identified that, you know, it was not an expense issue. It was a revenue issue. And, you know, as kind of documented in some of the presentation earlier. Now, that's not to say that there aren't areas where we can improve our expenses. You can always improve, you know, on expenses. But when you look at, you know, expense line items like, you know, sure, we can find ways to save $300 on office supplies and, you know, $50 here, $50 there. But the amount of money that's going to aggregate together by focusing on expenses is just not going to come up, you know, anywhere near the amount that we need. And as I said earlier in the beginning, you know, Mike and Michelle have done a great job of looking at ways where we can save money on the expense side. But we very quickly, you know, as I said, identified revenue as the issue. And then, you know, it was good to hear when we had our consultant come in. So we had a consultant work with us, and they had worked on the accounting side with the city for about a decade, and one of the first things they said to us is, in their experience, and this is a quote, Lathrup Village has a revenue problem, not a spending problem. So it was kind of corroborating for us in some way. So then we met with the consultant and talked more about what are our options as a city in terms of how we can raise revenue. And we're severely limited because, you know, there are all sorts of, as I said earlier, laws and regulations that control what we can and cannot do. So there were roughly about a dozen different options that we could do to grow our general fund and our revenue. And after a lot of deliberation, one by one, you know, we limited it down to two. So we canceled, or we we eliminated, you know, a large number of them as possibilities. And I'll put a list up in a few minutes of what we eliminated and talk real briefly about why we eliminated some of them. But after a lot of deliberation, the committee decided to recommend a two-stage approach to council. And the first stage was a Headley override. So we talked a little bit about the Headley override that we did in 2010, And so basically what would happen is we would put a Headley override on the ballot for the residents to decide, and that's a big reason why we're doing these town halls, and we're going to do a lot more of them, so that residents can learn about this and decide, it's up to us to decide as residents, whether or not we want to go on the way we are, and continue to defer expenses, or whether or not we want to try to invest in the city. So that's going to be something that's going to be, that can be put in front of the voters. And so what that would do is that would restore our millage rate. So we would go from 17.3 mils on the general operating side, and we would raise it back up to the charter value of 20 mils. So that'd be about a 2.7 mil increase. And then the same thing on the refuse side, going from about 2.6 to 3, so we'd add about 0.4. And so in total, we would restore 3.1 mils. And I'm being very careful with the way that I use my words here. It's restore because it's not an additional tax. It's putting us back where we're supposed to be, where our charter says we're supposed to be. So it would restore by 3 mils. And then in addition, as part of that recommendation, what we did is we recommended to put a 10-year lock on Headley. And that was the big mistake that we made in 2010. So what happened in 2010 is we reset the millage rate from 16 mils to 20. But then what happened is roughly around 2014, when the market started going back up again, the millage rate kept falling, and here we are again, 10 years later, or however many years later, we're back down to 17.3. So what most other communities have done when they've approved Headleys is they put a lock on it. So for example, Ferndale had a 10-year lock on their Headley override, and basically what that means is we restore the millage rate back to 20 mils, and it stays there. We're basically saying Headley can't touch those two millage rates for another 10 years. And then when 10 years go by, we would either revote that in, or we would let Headley start lowering our millage rate again. But that would give us time to catch up, time to grow the general fund, and start to try to deal with a lot of these deferred expenses. Mike just gave a big long list of them a few minutes ago. So what would that mean to you sitting here? So if we go to the next slide, the average taxable value in the city today is about $90,000, actually $90,046. So essentially what we would do is we'd multiply that times 3.1051 mils, and it would work out to about $280 per resident. So that's the average resident. Some of you who have a higher taxable value will pay more. Some of you will pay less. Yeah, and so one of the, what happens when I don't turn my page? One of the issues, with millage rates, which is really unfortunate, and there's no working around, is that they tend to, in some regards, not be equitable, right? Because some people are going to pay more than that, and some people are going to pay less. So people who have more expensive homes, or people who have moved in recently, who have been uncapped, we talk about uncapping, they're going to pay more than that. And then people who have been in their homes for a long time, like that 35-year resident, or people who have smaller, less expensive homes, are going to pay less than that. And there's no, unfortunately, there's no working around that. It is what it is. So one of the things that we wanted to see as a committee is we wanted to see how would this affect, the distribution of our residents. And so we put together a distribution. And what you can see here is that 43%, so roughly a little less than half, have taxable values that are less than $75,000. So for a little less than half of our population, they would pay $233 or less, again, based on their taxable value. 51%, so half, have taxable values of $75,000 to $150,000. So that's generally people who have been in their homes for 4 to 10 years. So they would be between $233 and $466. So some of those people would be less than average. Other people would be greater than average. And then that last 6%, or the 6% that would get hit hardest, so 5%, so a very low percentage of the population have homes $150,000 to $200,000. So they would be somewhere between $466 and $621. And then 1%. Have values over $200,000, and so those people would be more than 621. So again, the majority of the residents are not going to get hit dramatically, just the 6% there. And again, there's nothing you can do about that, unfortunately. There's no way to make it equitable. There's no way to say, you know, everybody pays $600 or everybody pays $300 or what have you. The way I kind of think of it, I mean, the way I kind of rationalize it to myself, the way the state laws work, you know, I think about like when I moved in 33 years ago, you know, my house was uncapped, and so I was paying much higher than average, and then I was protected by Prop A over time, and so now, you know, 33 years later, you know, I'm on the low end, and other people, newer residents, for example, are paying more. So in the long run, it kind of averages out, but when you look at it in an individual year, yeah, it's not as equitable as we would like. I mean, I would love to be able to say, you know, we'll charge everybody the $280 and be done with it. So it was equitable, but there's no way around that. It just doesn't work that way in you know, in Michigan. So then the one thing I just want to read, you know, a paragraph, you know, so we made our recommendation to council, and shortly after that, we had our fiscal year 24 audit, done by, please help me out, Maynor?
Maynor.
I'll just say Maynor. The second word is really long and a lot of consonants. But, you know, an independent auditor did our audit, and in the audit, in terms of the financial outlook, this is what they said. The city's budget for next year will require tough decisions by the city council and the citizens of Lathrup Village, being mindful of our long-term obligations. There are several economic factors that will challenge the city. The challenges include inflation, potential cuts to personal property tax, health insurance increases, pension costs, potential pre-funding of retiree health care, our overall millage rate, and state laws limiting the growth in property taxes. The 1978 Headley Amendment and Proposal A passed in '93 both limit growth to the rate of inflation. Headley requires a rollback in the overall millage rate if total property values grow at a rate higher than inflation, and Proposal A limits increases in individual property tax assessments to the rate of inflation. Previously, city residents approved a Headley rollback in May of 2010. However, the rollback expired, and continued shortfalls in revenue have required the city to rely heavily on its fund balance in previous years. And then the key sentence is here. This practice is not fiscally or financially responsible. A Headley rollback will need to be considered by the city council and voted on by the citizens to maintain or expand its level of services. So that's an independent auditor. Plant Moran, who is another independent auditor for years prior to Maynor, has told us the same thing. So we made that recommendation. I think it was like about an hour-and-a-half meeting, and council, you know, peppered us on how we got to our recommendation. But unfortunately, the recommendation came too late to get a Headley rollback on the November 2024 ballot. So what we did is we recommended that it would be on the 2025 ballot in this coming November. The problem with that is that, okay, if we put it on the ballot and it gets approved by the voters, we don't see any additional funds until late in 2026. Based on when the timing of property taxes. So that leaves us with a year and a half where our funding issues are not addressed. So what the committee also did was they made a second stage to the recommendation, which was what's called a Public Act 33 special assessment for public safety. And basically what that act allows is that cities with a population under 14,500 can assess its residents up to 10 mills for public safety and 10 mills for public safety capital and 10 mills for public safety operations. So what the committee did is we recommended that in the short term, in the year prior to a Headley override being on the ballot, that council invoke a Public Act 33 with a maximum of 3.1 mills. We don't need 10 mills for capital and 10 mills for operation, but basically what we're saying is invoke it for what would have been restored had we been able to get a Headley successfully on the ballot in 2024. So it would be 3.1 mills and then again, only for a 1-year period. So those funds, any funds raised by Public Act 33 would be required to be used for public safety. So one of the things Mike didn't mention, we need a new squad car. You know, we've got the police contract, you know, $40,000+ in additional expenses, police training, you know, all the different police and fire expenses we could use that money for. and then we wouldn't have to use money from the general fund to pay for those same types of programs and expenses. And those could be used on other priorities like the HVAC system or a recreational coordinator, or what have you. So the last thing, just to mention here is that we're doing this session, and as I said, we're going to do more sessions and put together, the committee is going to meet again in March to start putting together an education program, because this is not a short process to get the question on the ballot and to establish a Public Act 33. There are a lot of council meetings that need to take place. All of those council meetings will have public comment where you will all be able to come and talk and try to shape the opinions of council and their decision. There are required public hearings, so separate of public comment. In fact, there's one coming up at the council meeting this month on February 24th for setting the special assessment district for the Public Act 33. So again, hopefully you guys will all come and make your comments known. There are other things that have to happen. The governor and the attorney general have to sign off on our Headley override. So it's not something that's going to happen overnight. And again, we're doing this to kind of alert you to what's going on and educate you so that you're informed and you can make your voices heard. The last thing I just want to mention, one more slide, please, Mike. I said that there were about a dozen different options that we considered. I'm not going to go over all of these individually, but I'll just pick a few for example and talk about why we didn't choose these options. Basically, the overall reason that we didn't choose any of these other options is because they don't fit our particular situation. But one example is a road millage. So as I said earlier, most cities are putting general fund dollars into their road fund. And so if we were in that category and we did a road millage, we would then get dedicated funds towards the roads, and we wouldn't have to put general fund dollars into our road funds. But we don't fund our roads from the general fund because we don't have the money to do that. So enacting a new road millage wouldn't save us any money, wouldn't help us. Leaning on the DDA, as I mentioned earlier, we have a cost share agreement with our DDA, and our DDA is we work very well with them, and they're willing to share expenses with us. In fact, we needed a new truck, and what was it, last year we got a new truck, and they paid the lion's share of the truck outside of the cost share agreement. They just decided to help us out. Debt millage, this is another example that wouldn't really help us out. So cities have the ability to do a millage to pay for their outstanding debt. We as a city do not have a lot of unfunded debt. We've got $10 million, $5 million from the road bond. We've got $5 million from all the water and sewer improvements that we did. So that $10 million is all funded debt. The $5 million for the road comes from the road millage, dedicated road millage that we have, and then the $5 million that we have left for the water and sewer improvements comes from that surcharge that's on the water bill every month. The only debt that we have is from some projects about 10, 15 years, actually more closer to 15 years ago, water and sewer projects. So if we did a debt millage, we could pay off that debt, but the problem is first of all, that's water and sewer debt. So it's paid for out of the water and sewer fund like we talked about earlier. So that wouldn't free up any dollars either. And then the other option, just to go all the way down the bottom, was to do nothing. One option was not recommend just stay the course. But again, we didn't think that really was the tenor of our committee and our charge. I think residents want to see investment in the city. They want to see the services maintained. And so we felt our charge was to try to find a way to do that, and we made that recommendation to council. So at this point, do we have any question cards? Or, I mean, that's pretty much all we have to present. If people have questions or comments, Karen?
Yeah, I understand the numbers, but I'm a little behind on the committee structure and how the committee works with city council and our city staff.
Okay, so the committee, like all committees, are formed through council. So council wanted to form the committee. We put out notices to the community saying we were going to have, or that we were going to establish this committee. People forwarded their resumes and their applications, and then council, the mayor recommends the appointments, and then council votes on them. So all the people on the committee have financial experience. You can
Sure.
say what you do.
Hi, I work as a financial controller. It's also the middle of tax season, so I apologize for my appearance, but it's been a rough day.
Celine?
I'm a CPA and same.
Hi, and I have a financial background. I've been controller and project manager, and it's tax season, so I've been working on taxes as well.
So we're really glad to have all three of you here tonight. We're glad you gave the time. But yeah, so their applications are put in, and then the council picks the committee. And then in terms of the relationship, we're a recommending body, the committee is. So all the committee can do is recommend. So same like with the recreation committee, the tree committee, they make recommendations to council, and then council considers. You can kind of think of it as a group of people that are doing legwork for the council.
So who are, in terms of the way the committee works, you mentioned a consultant, and we have our two city folks who are part of the meetings, is that correct? Okay, and is there a chair of the subcommittee, or how does that work?
Usually it's a council person. So I chaired this one, like, we had several years ago when Salim was on council, we had a marijuana subcommittee, and he chaired that. Kelly chairs actually, I don't think she's chairing it, but whatever, Dalton is chairing the recreation committee and so forth.
Thank you.
Yeah. Kathy?
Yeah, I just had one question. I think I understood what you said about the special assessment. You're saying that you're going to recommend that it's just 3.1 mils and that it's limited to 1 year as a gap bridger until we can try to get the header. So it doesn't mean we're saying, blank check for 20 mils or 15 or whatever the council decides every year. It's a fixed amount that you're planning to ask.
Yeah, the only thing I would change to what you just said is up to 3.1 mils.
So up to.
Yeah, and actually, to get technical, that number is probably going to change a little bit, because by the time we get to the actual recommendation, we're going to get headlied again, and that 17.3 is going to drop to like 17.1, so it might go up a little bit. But the idea was, from the committee's perspective, is we don't want to give council a blank check. We don't need 20 mils, and obviously, it would be pitchforks and torches. It's probably going to be pitchforks and torches for 3 mils, but, we don't need that kind of money. We're not trying to gouge residents. We're trying to get enough money so that we can sustain services and invest and stop all these deferrals, because when you have all these years of deferrals, as I said, eventually you've got to start making those expenses, and that's why, our general fund has been dropping. As Maynard said, we're reaching into the general fund, and that's not a financially or fiscally sound strategy.
And then one other question is, I thought that many years ago, we voted a special millage for police and fire because we wanted, I seem to recall that. Did that expire? I've been here a long time, so I just remember we had a big meeting and everybody voted yay. Yes, we want our own police. So did that expire?
I don't know anything. We've got some long-term residents here.
Or was that part of the Headley instead, and I don't recall it?
Probably the headline.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I know everybody just got on board because we don't want to lose our police.
Yeah. And when we did the Headley, I'm going to stay away from Mike. When we did the Headley in 2010, well, let me make a couple comments about that. When we did the Headley in 2010, I think it was 68% of the residents voted for it, so it was very overwhelming. One of the differences between now and then is and I had a list of them here somewhere, but we've got a lot of services that we outsource. So back then, they to reduce expenses, for example, the DPW was outsourced, but we can't outsource the DPW again, right? You run out of options. And like I said, we looked at individual line items, and we're reducing where we can. There are some contracts that'll come up for renewal that maybe we can negotiate, but it's really hard to, negotiate downward.
Can I make a comment real quick? So the goal of the Public Act 33 assessment, which is this interim one that we're talking about, is to get the revenue on our books, starting with the summer tax bill this year, 2025 tax bill, right? So,
No. Yeah. Sorry, I was thinking Headley. Yeah.
right, so I guess what I'm saying with that is council will need to act on that pretty quick if we want to get that on the 25 tax bill. So if people are interested in having input on that, please attend the city council meetings and so forth for the next couple of months, because this is going to be a big deal in the next few city council meetings, I would think.
Back to the, doesn't Headley allow an increase, a yearly increase for inflation?
Yes.
So back to your diagram, when you do 1 and year 2, it's not, there's an additional.
Yeah, I said that when I was
About
working.
3% more this year.
Yeah. The one thing I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
What?
No, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, that's the point. There is an increase under Headley, it's just capped.
Yeah, so I did mention that. I said that there was a small increase for inflation, from year to year. So the problem with the last couple of years is we went through, massive inflation, 3 years ago and 2 years ago. That inflation increase doesn't cover the actual, I mean, it helped, but it doesn't cover the whole 8% that we experienced, for example, 3 years ago. But there is an adjustment for that.
And this year it'll be about 3.1%, I understand.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. This maybe Michelle? Yeah, 3.1. Yeah. Karen?
What happens if this goes to the voters and they vote down that thing?
Not voted.
Then we probably will have to start making some tough decisions. Yeah, I mean, there's really nothing left to outsource except the police, and nobody wants to do that. So, I don't know if Mike or Michelle, you have an answer for that, but it's.
Yeah, so essentially it's going to come down to kind of the stopgap. So like we talked about, Public Act 33 is the hope for this next year. The goal is naturally to be transparent with the public, which is why we're going after Headley. If that fails, then yeah, it's going to be major pressure on the council to see if we want to continue services or make cuts. If we want to continue those services or expand them, most likely it'd be Public Act 33 just stays in place.
John?
I'm going to ask a question which I know is not answerable at this time.
Okay. And the air conditioning came on right at the right time. What, John? I can't hear you.
So my unanswerable question is, whatever funds that we have that come directly or flow through state, county, that ultimately come from the federal government, how secure are those funds? That giant check, is that giant check cashable? And so the follow-on to that is, let's please engage with our state and federal representatives to try to get them to help answer that question. I'm certainly in favor of, we send somebody to some conference, which I'm sure they're going to be, maybe a special conference of mayors, but I think the conference of mayors might be too late, right? But we need to think about that. Are we going to have a surprise?
Yeah.
And we don't know yet.
Yeah, the good thing is Kelly, our mayor, myself, Jason, Jalen, we all have good relationships with our state rep and our state senator, so we do talk to them. But I'll let Mike talk about the $2 million check. And
Yeah, so the $2 million we were just awarded, we're not worried about that. That's going to be included in the state budget. The roughly $1 million that Congresswoman Tlaib got us, that's up in the air. The past 2 weeks, naturally, everyone's seen in Washington has been an absolute whirlwind. Federal funds have been paused. They've been reinstated. Our direction from our conversations with the Congresswoman is just continue through the grant process. Because even though we were earmarked this money, we still have to jump through the FEMA grant hoops. And so we're just moving forward with that. All indications are specifically for infrastructure funding. They're going to stay in place, but all we can do is work through the process and see what happens. So that's the direction we've gotten from the feds right now.
all right, I'm going to call on you now. I didn't know your name, that's why I haven't called you.
Hi, my name's Shelley Reeves,
Oh, hi, Shelley. Oh, yeah, okay. I didn't
and
recognize
I'm
you.
fairly new to getting involved in attending these meetings, so
Good.
thank you for the great presentation. You went a solid hour, which is impressive, and I did learn a lot. I am wondering, just learning, so I'm not trying to give an impression that this is my opinion, but it sounds as if the 33, if that's enacted, and then like I believe Karen asked, if it's not voted on, could the 33 just be forever? As in, like, I understand you're coming and asking for the public to consider all of these and ask for that need, but also at the same time, we can still do it even if you say no?
Yeah, so that is a possibility. I mean, obviously, I can't speak for everyone on council. I know I don't want to do that. I want the voters to decide. But that is an option to, for council. If the voters vote it down, council could say, well, you know what, we're faced with, cutting the police force or something like that, and we don't want to do that, so we're going to implement a Public Act 33 longer than a year. And again, we'd have to go through the process. But again, I can tell you, I don't want to do that. I want the voters to decide, and
Clearly, you're having the forum to discuss it, so I appreciate that. One other thing that I was curious about, and actually, it's kind of upsetting to see that chart showing Michigan not sending that money back to the cities. Is there anything a citizen can do to help support that conversation? And who would we reach out to show the disappointment? Because, that's a big gap if we're talking $2 million over that span of time.
yep. So the answer to that question is Jeremy Moss, our state senator, that represents us, and then Jason Hoskins, and then any other, reps and senators from the state, because they're the ones who have to change it. We were really hopeful that it was going to happen when, again, they had all three branches. Now they don't have the state, not the Senate, yeah. And then we were kind of hopeful it would happen in lame duck, but then lame duck turned out to be a lame duck, and they didn't get to it. So, but that's the only solution. There's a lot of problems with it's not just not giving the money back, but the unintended consequences of not allowing the taxable value to go back, or the millage rate to go back up when the taxable value of the city goes down. That was a gaping hole that they've been trying to fix. The other one was the uncapping. They never thought that through when the legislation was passed. So that's another thing that could help, because that would be the uncapping. If it didn't go towards the Headley calculation, then it wouldn't be a wash. We would get a constant new revenue stream.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I will say both Jason and Jeremy were present at this month's city council meeting, and Jeremy mentioned that he and Jason host regular, I believe it's monthly, meeting, I believe, at the Southfield Public Library to hear and address their constituents' concerns. On a completely unrelated note, I intend to attend the next one. So if you'd like to join me, we could ask those questions there as well.
Yeah, I was at that same meeting,
Okay.
and that was my first thought, that's an opportunity. So thank you.
Yeah, I believe those are always on the first Monday of the month. The only reason why I know that is because I can never go because we have council meetings at the same time. So they're usually, I think, at 7 o'clock.
Yeah, on the Public Act 33, just one last thing. Our recommendation, this committee's recommendation to council was to, implement that act, but to only give the council authority for 1 year to do that. We wanted the authority to expire. So it's going to be up to council what they ultimately do, but our initial recommendation was, give them that suggestion, but limit the authority to 1 year.
Kim?
I'm for the Headley override. I am a 32 resident, so I'm on the lower end. I absolutely support raising the taxes. Sorry, there isn't a way to do it more fairly, because I think that I'd be happy to write you a check now for $500. if it was gonna make a difference. It's not gonna make a difference, but, I don't think we need new chairs. I do think we need to have these meetings live streamed. I don't know how much that costs, but I asked that question and I was told it's too expensive to do. I think these are important. I understand it's being taped, but this is an important topic that people need to be educated about. And
I'm live streaming.
you're live streaming? Okay, great. That's great. The city isn't, right? So I would support that. Something else, but that's enough.
Correct me if I'm wrong, I think the 600,000 plus money that was secured through US Rep Talib, is that for water main replacement? And is that something that's already under contract that we're obligated to pay whether or not we get that funding?
So with this congressional directed spending, when you work with the congresswoman or the federal, you apply for certain programs. So, and then naturally they select what they think is going to be best for them. So, yeah, we're not necessarily obligated to do the project. However, if we do not do it, we will never see that money again.
But it's not as though we're gonna have to pay for it and then not get the money.
Correct, yeah. So right now, City Council approved engineering for it. We're in that phase. Like I said, we still have to work through the grant process. So as soon as FEMA gives us the okay, that's when we know we're good to issue an RFP for a contractor to come in. So we still got a while for this process. So yeah, we're not going to commit to a contractor until we know the funds are available. And it is a reimbursement grant, so you're not going to see just a check of $1 million sitting in our water account. We'll spend it, submit it, the federal government will give us a check back.
Yeah, and both of those grants are key. I mean, a large part of the, I get the two bonds mixed up, but I think it was $5.8 million was water and sewer, or is it the other way around? We had they were both roughly around $5 million. The water and sewer bond was, whatever. I mean, it was roughly $5 million. A large portion of that spend was to replace water mains, because our water mains a lot of them are 100 years old and they're designed for 50-year life. So that $3 million is just gold to us, because that's a mile and a half of.
Yeah, roughly. We'll get close to doing all of Southfield Road.
Yeah.
So the Congresswoman's grant is for south of 696, and the $2 million will be for the north side of the city.
Yeah, and I mentioned earlier the capital improvement plan has $20 million in identified spend. A lot of that is water main. There was somebody, Karen.
I co-chaired the Blue Ribbon Committee that recommended the Headley override in 2010, and some of the information that's shared isn't exactly how it went. The difference between then and now is that in 2010, the City Council, the City Administration, the Blue Ribbon Committee, and the community all did a thorough study of the budget. Revenue was reallocated to areas that met the priorities of residents, and cuts were made in areas that didn't meet those needs and wants. We went line by line through that budget, and I know there have been no conversations with residents about setting priorities. There hasn't been reallocating of resources. Our fund balance has almost been depleted. And I was also, I was on the Southfield School Board for 14 years, and my first year on, Proposal A passed. And so every year of those 14 years on the school board, we were forced to make cuts. And every year we did it with input from our stakeholders and with a lot of thought to try and keep the impact of those cuts as far away from the classroom as is possible. I know that there is waste. I know that we haven't gone line item by line item based on what our residents want. I have a couple of examples. In the last 18 months, we paid Plant and Moran $313,520. About $25,000 of that was for the 2023 audit, but the remaining was for temporary accounting help. During that time, we were paying a city administrator, a treasurer, a finance director, a deputy treasurer, and an accounts payable person. I don't know if we had such a mess that had to be cleaned up or what the situation is, but that's a lot of money. And only $40,000 was budgeted. And the independent consultant that Mr. Cantor refers to is from Plant Moran. Also, in the last 3 years, we've paid Giffords Webster $1,567,919 just to manage projects and to plan. I don't know what we've gotten for that money. At the last Planning Commission meeting, a resident thought that Eric from Giffords Webster and Austin from RGGA were representatives from the Cernow Company. He had no idea that they were there representing Lathrup Village residents. We had a $1.8 million water loss that was not addressed. And I truly believe, after spending time on council for 2 years and studying this budget for the last 7 years at least, there's room to make cuts instead of just continually coming to residents asking for more money. And the statement you read regarding having to do a Headley override, that was written by the city, not the auditor.
Mike, do you want to talk about Plant Moran or any of that, or touch on it?
Plant Moran, sorry. I think using Plant Moran for the gap that we experienced was a very wise decision. It was money well spent. Since I've been here since March, and I looked at it today. Since April, we've spent $125,000 on Plant Moran. Plant Moran was your auditor for several years. When we had to use a new auditor because they couldn't audit their own work, they were instrumental. It made the process of using a new auditor seamless, and we had half the findings for fiscal year '24 than we had in previous years. The last thing that Plant Moran did help us with was our year-end reporting for 2024. We have not used them for 2 months, and we have no intention of using them for a regular routine basis.
And then Mike is.
Yeah, then
has
as
the
for
general-
public input
Yeah.
for the residents for the budget, similar to last year, I'll be holding a budget input meeting where I'm going to get feedback from the residents to help me start the budget process. So we started that internally behind the scenes. Now it's time to get you guys involved. Let me know what you think the city's priority should be. So once I get these ideas from you guys, I'm able to work with my staff to start building the budget, and then we start working through the normal process with council. So similar to last year, I'll get everything written down from our discussions that we shared with council, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. And then I'll address a couple of the other things that were said there. In terms of the statement from Maynor, there is no way that an independent auditor, Plant Moran or Maynor, is going to allow the city to write portions of the audit. They're not going to risk their license, their reputation, to say to the city, oh, hey, here, write your financial outlook. That just doesn't happen. In terms of Giffords Webster, yes, we have spent a lot of money with Giffords Webster. They are act as our engineering department and our planners. As far as the engineering, I mentioned we've had 2 3-year projects, the road and the water and sewer. We've spent a lot of money on engineering. Somebody has to do the engineering, so somebody's getting that money. And the analysis that we did was about a year ago when we looked at the administrative costs. Don't hold me to these numbers exactly, but Giffords Webster, I believe, was about 14% in terms of costs, when the industry standard was somewhere in the low 20s. And then I can't remember the exact numbers, but they also came in several percent lower than what the original estimate was. So again, some engineering company is going to get that money, and we've been thrilled with the work that Giffords and Webster has done. The other thing I would say is I get why I heard the same comments that Karen mentioned about residents saying that they felt like Eric Peach, who is our planner from Giffords and Webster, was representing Cernow in the Planning Commission meeting and the HDC meeting. Again, they serve as our planners. So what the planners do is they talk, daily with the potential developers. They talk daily with our city staff. they're the go-between, they're the planners, they're working on helping bring developments to the city. So when they sit there in the meetings, they're the ones that are introducing the project and the issues. They're the ones that evaluate the projects against our zoning ordinances and our local ordinances, and talk about where the potential projects meet the ordinance, don't meet the ordinance, things they need to work on. So I can definitely see why a resident who is not familiar with the process would think that, Eric was a representative from, in this case, Surnow, because they're presenting the project. But again, it doesn't matter who the planner is. Again, Giffords-Webster is not the bad guy for doing their job. If it was another company, it would be the same thing. They would look like they were, representing the developer, because they're presenting the project to the planning commission. They assist the planning commission. So, yeah, I think that was it. So other questions? Karen?
Comment about that. The difference with Giffords-Webster is that they are the ones who are advising on what projects we need to do. So they're the ones recommending, and then they're also the ones who are managing those projects. And I think there should be there should be checks and balances. I think that's a conflict of interest. So that's my issue with that.
You have to give so much because we can't afford a city planner, right?
Yeah, I mean.
And so they're more or less contract workers for us because we don't have a planner.
Right. Same with the city engineer.
Well, I really want to thank the panel because we've made a lot of things understandable for me. A lot of it sounds like a lot to understand, so I appreciate breaking it down.
Other questions, comments? Kim?
I remembered what else I was going to say. At the risk of being very unpopular, especially with Frank, how much is the leaf pickup program? Do you know?
Well, our staff runs it, so mainly it's time. I would have to work with them to figure out time. The biggest cost naturally is the equipment. So since we do run those tow-behind Vectors, those are each roughly $75,000 a piece, and if they both go down and I have to send out a message saying we are not doing leaf pickup this year, I don't know what that's going to do to City Hall.
Learned to use my leaves in my garden, which I didn't know like 5-10 years ago, and I really like the leaf program. Last year, I don't think we used the same one. We have our house, our yard is filled with leaves. So I just want to say, I think we can look at ways to cut back as well. And so I'm not against that.
Not on the leaf program.
Yeah, you can use our leaves. Put them in your garden. Put them in your garden. Put them in my garden. I know. I said it's going to be unpopular.
Bring you my leaves over.
Okay, bring them over. Bring them over.
Yeah.
If we bag them, is it the same cost?
Yeah, but if you put them in bags, they're picked up by our soccer contractor, which is Tringali. But naturally, the city and I know where I live, we love to be able to just put them next to the curb and get them picked up. We could look at our neighbors over in Berkeley where they had a similar situation where they put a Headley on the ballot. It failed, and their first thing they cut was leaf pickup. And talked to my colleagues over there, it was an absolute nightmare in their city hall for the first month or so.
Yeah, that was in the news like crazy. Kim, I just want to be specific and say that, and I said this earlier, it's not that we're not looking at expenses. I mean, again, I did a project last year. Mike and Michelle are constantly looking for ways to save, but the amount of money that we're going to save by the things that we find are not going to aggregate to the level of being able to spend $70,000 on a new leaf vac or replace the HVAC system or all the capital needs any of the capital needs that we have. So it's not that we're just focusing on revenue and saying, damn the expenses. We're looking at expenses. We're always looking at expenses, but it's just not going to rise to the level that we need, to maintain the services and continue to invest in the community. Roger?
How much would the Headley override, that extra 3%, bring in on a yearly basis?
So roughly a mill is about $200,000. So that would bring in an extra $600,000 for the 3.1 mills per year.
55.
What's that?
555,000.
That's what 3.1, I know.
So we're saying
roughly.
that there's probably not, we're not going to save 555,000 a year in cutting expenses.
Right.
Right? That's what we're saying. And we looked at that as a committee. We asked that first. It's like, hey, can we cut some things? Is that doable? But that's not going to give us the revenue that we need. I think that's what we determined.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, when I met with the police, I had a few-hour meeting with the police to go over their budget. And I walked in there thinking I was gonna, because you saw it, 60% of our budget. And I'm like, there's gonna be tons of things that we're gonna be able to cut here. And, Mike was in that meeting, Lieutenant Zhang and Chief McKee, they gave me a schooling and also, I walked out of there exceptionally impressed by what Chief McKee has done in terms of trimming his budget and keeping it, as low as possible. So for example, we've got a lot of mandated training. So what's the name of the system? They got, not Clemis. They've got a training system that they pay an annual fee for, and they can take all their training as opposed to, going live and spending more money. Now, some of it has to be live, but it was just one thing after another where I was like, all right, I'm going to get you on this one. And he's like, well, no, here's what we've done. And again, that's our biggest line item. It's 60% of our general fund is the police and fire. John?
This is related to this leaf issue, but it's just an example of we need to avoid unintended consequences. And I am aware of a disease that affects the silver maples that I made an inquiry about this with my gardener. And they said that we don't face that in Lathrup Village, but there is a risk. You leave the leaves around till spring and it can spread a particular silver maple disease. And we have a lot of silver maples. So we really need to, before you cut something, make sure that there are not unintended consequences.
Good point. Anything else? Any other questions, concerns, comments? All right, well, I appreciate everybody coming out and listening. Like I said, it's not the most exciting stuff, but again, we're going to do more of these. Again, I mentioned our committee is going to meet and look at other ways to educate the residents. Again, our goal is to make the residents informed, because the residents are the ones who are going to have to vote on this if it does get on the ballot. And the residents are the ones who are going to have to pay the 3 mills if we do a PA 33. And so, you need to be informed so that you can come to the council meetings if you agree or disagree and voice your opinion. So I appreciate you guys being engaged, and anything you can do to get your neighbors to come out to the next one and engage them. The more people we have coming to our meetings, the better it is. So thanks for coming, and everybody have a good night.